Pratik is going to be covering governing your data from origin to consumption. And Adi actually had a question for you, which will likely be answered during the presentation, or you can take it now, whichever you prefer.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brian. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, everything's good. I can see your screen as well, so thanks.
All right, fantastic. Really excited to share. My name is Pratik Verma. I am a group program manager inside of Azure Data. I work with Sumi and Gaurav on Azure Purview as well. Now, Sumi and Gaurav covered a broad ground on Azure Purview as a whole. And so you'll remember this slide from Sumi's presentation about how Azure Purview is reimagining data governance. Now, for the data estate management inside of Azure Purview, we'll focus in on my conversation on the first middle two sections on the slide. The first one is about setting the foundation for effective data governance, and another one is how do you maximize the business value through end-to-end lineage. That's what we'll cover today. Now, you've also seen this particular view on Sumi's and Gaurav's slide about how we envision Azure Purview. Our aspiration with Azure Purview is to allow our customers to manage their data estate entirely for their entire data estate, starting from databases on-prem to data sources on multi-cloud environments to SaaS applications, all through the actions of the data map, which is the foundation of the data governance. Now, this data map contains a graph of all your data assets anywhere in your data estate. And it does so, it represents your data assets in sort of two foundational ways. It represents it as a graph, which contains nodes of data assets that are connected to other data assets through lineage arcs. And then you can assign tags to individual data assets, from a variety of different lenses, be it business metadata, operational metadata, technical metadata, a lot of screenshots and the demos that you saw from Gaurav's demo and Sumi's demo earlier. Now, the whole perspective that Azure Purview brings to the table that's unique is the idea that you can cover your entire data estate from the origin, where most of the data assets are sort of captured in your on-premises data sources like SQL servers on-prem, SAPs, all the way through to Azure and to BI tools. Now, the data map powers the two experiences on top. The first being the data catalog, the other being the data insights. The data catalog gives your data engineers, data consumers, the ability to interact with the data map from a non-technical way or non-programmatic way. But data insights also give you the ability to see the estate as a whole from any of the lenses that you may how much the business glossary management is covered across the entire data estate, whereas a security administrator may be interested in what kind of sensitive information is present in which systems. Now, for the purposes of our discussion right now, what I'll really sort of drill down in on is how does Azure Purview automatically capture the lineage of data as it moves from the source on-prem all the way through multi-cloud to Power BI on consumption side, and how all of that is powered automatically so you can actually do the job of tracing and trusting the data all the way through. So this view kind of gives you a view of what I just kind of summarized. Now, Azure Purview is the one unique thing that allows you to span not only the data sources on-prem, but also in the cloud holistically. It's the first platform as a service offering for managing data governance, which provides you the single pane of glass. So let me orient us. So on the far left, what we've shown here is data sources on-prem. These are your SQL servers, your Teradata's, your SAPs of the world, where a lot of operational data gets collected. Oftentimes, if you're doing digital transformation, you're ingesting that data into the cloud using a variety of tools. One tool that we really love is Azure Data Factory. It allows you to copy data into the cloud very easily from lots of different sources, land it in cloud storage in the landing zone, and then through the operation of a variety of different query engines, let's say your ETL transformations inside of Synapse, or Spark notebooks inside of Synapse, or consumption in Synapse. Maybe you put a little bit of SQL on top, maybe you put a little bit of Cosmos DB on top to handle your data sets in kind of a NoSQL way. And at the end of the day, you kind of enrich the data sets. And the landing data sets eventually get consumed in lots of different modalities through lots of different users. So one example would be I share a Power BI report that is powered by a table in Synapse, which got generated from a file in SAP that was ingested through Azure Data Factory into a CSV file in Azure Storage. So you can see kind of all sorts of things are happening to the data sets as we're moving from origin to consumption. Another example would be a cloud native app where you're building a mobile application that's powered by Cosmos DB in the backend because you want to be able to give, fast responses back to our users. Another example would be, you've created a file, you've enriched it, you've done some transformations using our query engines, and now you're trying to share that as an extract across your tenant or across different data sources. So as you're using all your environments for managing your data estate, you may have the tools itself may change in any of these blue boxes, but the net kind of pipeline from data supply chain from source to consumption, falls and looks something like this. Now, this is what Azure Purview allows you to keep track of as data moves from the left to the right, gets more from the origin, kind of raw form, all the way to consumption form on the right-hand side. So that's what we're going to drill in onto our demo. So let me switch over to Purview Studio. So this is something that should look familiar to you based on what Sumi just shared with you. Now, I'll do one click before. Now, the good part is what Azure Purview is replacing is a collection of box softwares, 4 or 5 of them that, our customers gave us feedback that, they're currently using when they hadn't had Purview yet. They were using a lot of business process to manage their infrastructure, using a lot of business process to manage the data management aspects of governance and everything else. So with Azure Purview, what you're seeing in Azure Portal right now is a data engineer or a cloud administrator that has provisioned an Azure Purview account for consumption and use by lots of business users in one place. Now, I'll highlight 2 specific things. This is a platform as a service offering. So unlike box software where you would have to maintain the infrastructure, the VMs, and then buy licenses of software, then install a bunch of components together, you don't have to do any of that. It's all covered underneath the covers. We are using underneath the covers Cosmos DB, Azure Search, Kubernetes, and all the goodies that allow you to take advantage of the cloud native scale without the infrastructure headache of building all that yourself. Now, the one thing we'll drill down here is into Purview Studio. So once Purview has been provisioned, most of the time your end users, be it business users, data engineers, data scientists, will be going in and interacting with Purview using the Purview Studio. Now, let's go drill down into Azure Purview Studio, and this will become kind of familiar to you as well, based on kind of what Sumi shared. Now, oftentimes when I'm looking for my data estate, what has happened already in this particular Contoso Purview account is we've connected it to 116 some data odd sources. These are, a variety of different data sources in our demo environment. We've also cataloged about 5,000 data assets. An asset would be a file or a table or a data set inside a Power BI report. Those are individual pieces of data sets that are somehow related to each other through transformations or lineage arcs or data movement motions as well. So because you're already in here as a data user or data consumer, I may be coming in and I may be saying, okay, I'm looking for business, doing some sort of marketing analytics. So let me find data sets that belong to customers. So I'll say, I may also need some finance information to keep track of, how many different customers are using how much of my product. So let's go search for that. And what we're landing on is a list view that kind of shows you all the different data assets. Now, what's really natural next step for me is to figure out, okay, let me hone in on a data set that may be of interest to me. So I'm going to go in and I find this customer table. This looks like it's kind of a sales data set. It contains email addresses. So I'm going to go drill down on it. Now, once I drill down on it, Sumi shared a little bit about, all the different information a user can find out about it. But my first question comes in is, this particular data source happens to be a table inside of SQL Server. Where did it come from? Like, how did that data set actually get generated? And can I really trust it? Where is this data set actually being used? What else other things are these things sort of populating? So to do that, it's very easy for me to go click directly into the lineage tab here to go view the lineage of how this particular data asset is being used across my system and how it came to be in one place. So let me sort of focus us in on that. You notice that on the pane I opened up, I kind of zoomed in to the lineage graph. I can zoom out. This allows me to really visually traverse different aspects of the data asset so that I can zoom in and kind of really look at, evaluating kind of how this data set is being utilized. So let's take a look at a couple things here. What we noticed here is this particular SQL table, I looked at it as part of the overview. I noticed that this contains a few columns. So let's go take a look at this. I'm going to look at that. This table contains a bunch of information like, company ID, email addresses, first name, last name. It's got a couple passwords. So let's pick, kind of a couple columns to highlight, what the data sets are that are contained inside, which fields are contained inside of a particular asset. Now, if I were to zoom out of this, I can now, through the lineage graph, see that this particular SQL table is being utilized in two different data sets downstream. So you'll notice, remember on our previous graph, chart we saw, a SQL database on-prem powering some of the data sets through ingestion into a cloud store. So this is an example where using Azure Data Factory, what we've been doing is copying this SQL table into two other downstream resources, data assets. First is a customer credential table, which has a couple of fields removed. Another one happens to be a file inside of Azure Cloud Store. And what you're able to see is through various ETL transformation in Azure Data Factory. So let's take a look at this particular one. We are able to track that there have been data movements and copy movements happening underneath the covers behind the scenes. In this particular Data Factory instance, the Lineage Demo March 2020, in that particular Azure Data Factory instance, there's a particular data pipeline that is executing. The logic inside of that pipeline can be visualized in the Data Factory when you go switch to it. But that transformation is taking an extract of the data from one SQL table and copying it into another SQL table. And in the process, it's removing the password hash in this particular credential. Now, you'll also notice that at the same time, another data asset is being created through one or more transformations. So in this particular case, there happens to be two different transformations with two different pipelines that are generating another extract. And in this particular file extract, you are actually taking the password hash and continuing on forward. So this allows you to keep track of how the different data assets are grouped together in the different data systems. Now, this is one specific shot of the view. Now, let's take a look at kind of the earlier part of the funnel and then the end of the phase. So let's go back directly to the source, the origin, if you will. So in this tab, I happen to have a Teradata database, which is on-prem. And inside of this Teradata database, I have a particular product data set. I can go drill down. I've already configured this for scanning. So this happened to be scanned last August and happens to be on one of the data sources on premises in this particular table. If I look at the lineage of it, I can see that this data assets is being transformed within Teradata itself. And I've created two different result sets that originate from this particular Teradata table. So what this is showing you is Azure Purview's ability to go drill down, focus specifically in the data source itself that has been configured for automated scan and classification, and capture what's happening inside the particular Teradata table itself. Then, if that data set is being copied from this Teradata database or a SQL database to another data source in cloud, through the movement of Azure Data Factory, you're able to see that view itself. So you're able to see the transformations that are carrying a table from the origin in the SQL table to other downstream applications, in this particular case, another SQL table, and another file. And more importantly, let's go look at, we saw the origin, the lineage within what's happening inside of the system. We saw how the data set is moving from one system to another. And let's take it all the way to consumption. So let's take a look at another example where we have a Power BI dashboard. So on the right-hand side, what I'm showing you is a Power BI tenant that has been configured for scan to this Azure Purview account. And we're seeing that this particular report, dashboard that is being seen by hundreds and hundreds of people inside of your company, is actually powered by a finance report. So it's one of the measures inside of the report is being powered by this Power BI report, which is sourcing data either through direct query or through automation, through local query, inside of a data set from somewhere outside of Power BI. And those two things happens to be a file inside of Cloud Store, Azure Data Lake resource set, and a table inside of SQL database. So using this lineage arc, you notice how we're building up these lineage arcs all the way down from origin in Teradata SQL through transformations through Azure Data Factory, through connection to Power BI datasets, all the way through. So you can notice one very specific thing. How did this Power BI dashboard metric come from all the way down from that table in SAP on-prem? That's really cool and fantastic. So that's kind of what I wanted to share here. There's a couple other things that you may be thinking about. You're going to say, well, this is all fantastic and good, but then how do I kind of use it beyond this particular data sets instead of just making a particular pretty graph here? And isn't populating and creating this lineage graph really problematic? Because most other tools out there, ETL transformation tools or other catalog tools, force you to have to create and populate that manually. So here's where we're going to go in and jump into a couple neat tricks here. So you'll notice that I looked at this particular Power BI data set and I said, oh, it's originating from this particular data source. If I were to switch to particular data source here, I can then pivot around this particular view to see what other applications and downstream measures are being connected and originating from this particular file itself. So in addition to that particular dashboard, it turns out that there's a lot more other reports that are also powered by the same data sets. So you can actually find other data sets that you can trust if you trust this particular data set. Or if there's an error in one of these data sets, you can propagate that error all the way through. So you can fix it. And then after you provide the fix, you can basically make sure that all the data sets and the impact of all downstream data sources is measured and known to your data engineer. Now, you know what I said about, how does this actually get populated all the way through? So it happens from a variety of different sources, but there's only three main things you have to worry about. Let's go jump into this particular view. You've seen this on Gaurav's chart about how we scan and configure a bunch of data sources for management. So in this particular scheme, what you're seeing is a Contoso data estate. It's broken down into just sort of three logical units: the data sources on-prem, the data sources on Azure in the cloud that are doing the enrichment, and the data sources that are being where the final result set of data sets are being consumed. So you'll notice that we walk through Teradata, SQL Server, Cloud Store, Power BI, and we saw kind of how the lineage was connected to all the way through. So when you register a data source, let's say a SQL Server or Teradata data source, when you configure it for automated scanning and classification, you're capturing not just the metadata, but also stored procedures, and also how those stored procedures are creating other data assets together. Now, we covered those for a subset of the data sources today. Over time, we're going to increase the number of data sources that we are going to provide you scanning for, so you can capture the lineage and the metadata from all those sources from within those data sets itself very quickly and easily. So you can sort of capture that. Now, the same thing happens on Power BI. Just by registering Power BI, you'll be able to see all the lineage between different artifacts inside of Power BI, plus the ability to connect the data source from the Power BI, the data set from the Power BI, will be able to link across to the files inside of Azure Data Store when you register both the Power BI data source and the Azure Data Lake Store. So the step number one is basically bringing under management of an Azure Purview account all of your data sources on-prem, all of your data sources on Azure Cloud Store, and all your data sources in Power BI, so that in one place, you are able to see the 3 steps of lineage within Teradata, across data sources, and all the way through the consumption. So you can build that lineage all the way through. Now, the one last thing you'll say is, great, that is fantastic. How did you figure out this particular transformation? Now, this ETL transformation is going on. So how did you actually capture that? Because, how does that show up in this particular view here? Because it's Azure Data Factory moving the data source from one to another. To answer that, it's very simple. You go into the Management Studio, go into the Data Factory tab in the external connections. And once you've done that, any and all of the data sources, the Data Factory instances that have been registered into this particular Azure Purview account will emit lineage directly into this data map automatically, so you don't have to manually do that. So you'll notice that this particular lineage demo March is what was registered previously. And this is what is allowing us to look at the transformation that connects this table to this particular table that is moved after transformation. So through this action, you are able to create an entire active metadata graph of your entire data estate without having your data engineer to go into each system by system, then connecting them through, manually populating the lineage arcs, making sure that they're current when transformations happen, when ETL pipelines change. All those transformations are being captured directly. And it allows you to capture the view from the cradle to the consumption of this data set. So that's really sort of powerful. Now, what you'll notice again is on this particular view, we're showing you, a lot of data sources today, a bunch of data sources from Microsoft on Azure Cloud for SQL Server, a bunch of Power BI. We're showing you Teradata. And as Simi mentioned, we have the ability to add other data sources like SQL Server, like Amazon S3, like Cosmos DB, like Synapse, and so on and so forth. And we're always increasing this list as we go along. Now, there are going to always be scenarios, ETL tools, transformation tools, Spark query engines, and things like that are going to be, covering in portions of your data estate, which, may not be something that we're building in ourselves, or it's something that we're building, but it's longer down on our roadmap. So to address those questions, you don't have to worry about carving that and leaving that part of your data estate dark. You can go into Apache Atlas API. This is an open source API that lots of open source tools already depend on and are built to use. And these data sets in here, this API, you'll find a lot of developers already know and are familiar with this API. So you don't have to train people on a proprietary API from a cloud vendor. Microsoft has taken a very specific open approach to solving this particular problem. So we've created this. Using this, you can utilize a lineage into your other downstream applications, or you can auto-populate this lineage using Apache Atlas compatible hooks. And with a little bit of programmatic sort of elbow grease, you can basically automate the population of data insights and data reports, this lineage arcs, across from any system that may be of interest to you. So in a nutshell, what we covered today was how do we register a particular data store, bring it under management of Azure Purview, and then how do we basically automatically capture lineage from origin through across the hybrid to on-prem, from on-prem to the cloud divide, all the way through from analytics enrichment to the consumption zone. So with that, I'll switch back to the slide here to cover on, how do you get started? So we covered a fair bit about Azure Purview in action to the lineage all the way through. We'll notice here, there's a couple points I want to hit back again. We saw the power of the data map in action here, where you can connect a data source, whether it's on premises or clouds, into the data map. The data map allows you to connect and register and bring a data sources under management of an Azure Purview account, a set of system, your entire data estate, either through automated crawling or scanning or through APIs, where you can capture all the lineage through the entire chain in one place automatically. And once you have that, you can then enable your business users to use that automatically without having to learn API code, without having to learn kind of programmatic things, without having to learn how to manually update it and always keep it up to date. So you can use it to make sure that the self-service of data discovery is easy. Now, the last thing I want to leave you with is an insight on how we're thinking about why Microsoft is the unique sort of cloud provider that provides a PaaS governance offering to you, and why you should go with us. Now, the interesting thing about here is we happen to have within Microsoft one of everything. So we have a SQL Server on-prem. So you're using a lot of our SQL Server for operational databases. You can bring that under management of Azure Purview, fully integrated already. You're using a lot of our Azure Data Services, operational analytics systems, your Cosmos DB, Synapse, your storage accounts, your GW accounts, your Custo accounts. So you can bring them all under management of Azure Purview. And finally, you can connect it to Power BI and Power Platform and bring them under management of Azure Purview. So if you're using a lot of our product, you're going to get a very unique, fully integrated view of Azure Purview and your data estate from Microsoft as a whole. And in addition, you saw that we brought Teradata under management to a similar extent as we did SQL Server. We will be adding that to Amazon S3. We'll be adding that to Google Clouds. We'll be adding that to other data sources on, from Microsoft, other cloud vendors, or database providers. So keep an eye out for what Sumi will share with us, down the road around Ignite and more. So with that, I'll close it off with saying, you saw a lot of things today. The first thing you should be able to do is go into Azure Portal, provision yourself an Azure Purview account, connect it to your Power BI tenant, connecting your SQL Server on-prem so you can replicate what I just showed you today. And by the way, the one awesome thing is, if you're using Azure Purview and you're connecting Power BI and your SQL Server on-prem, both of those scanning for those are free so that you can you're only paying for the data map. So this, really take advantage of that. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for, your attention.
Hey,
Brian, back to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks. And Adi, thank you very much. That was great. We do have some questions. Adi, do you want to go with the first one? I'll follow up.
Yes, well, I think, Pratik, you already answered it, but let's make sure, everyone captured how you do it. So for business analysts, one of their main tasks is to create an impact analysis of how, kind of a study of the business activities, where the data goes, how the data flows, what are the different pipelines, ETLs that they're building, that the organization creates. So maybe if you can remind us again, how can we check it out and how it can help us with the impact analysis that we want to create.
Yep, exactly right. Now, the one, this is the screen I would go back to on my screen where I'm showing you kind of a view, an example of the customer table and a lineage graph connecting a particular SQL table to another downstream applications. So one of the things you can see in this one particular case is, if I'm looking at a particular data source, I will know where did it come from, and I can go traverse to a particular switch to a particular data asset and see what the impact is to a particular downstream data set from an upstream data set. And I can drill down into, what are the criteria and different tags that are applicable to it. And if I were to go back to the lineage graph, I can see,
yeah, go ahead.
I
just want to break in. We can't see your screen right now. If you could, we need to put the screen up there just a moment. There we go. Thank you.
Oh, how about that now?
Got it. Thanks.
Awesome. Good. So in this particular case, let's say if I'm sitting into this credential removed SQL table, I can find out what is the impact to an error, let's say in a record inside of this upstream customer table through the actions of this lineage arc. Now, what we're really excited about this is we've set up this foundation. What we want to be able to do things like is, for you to do a traversal of this entire lineage, not just through interactions with each other, but through automated propagation. So imagine having a tag on this particular customer table, which is, let's say if I go to switch to this asset, imagine having a tag that says this contains email addresses or a person's name. And if it's being carried over into any of the downstream applications, we want to be able to have those tags be automatically applied to those tags as well. So those are some of the activities and other goodies that we're going to be building in to this lineage thing to make the impact analysis workflow a lot easier and simpler for our customers. Today, you can see how that entire data set is related to other data sets in the entire graph, which is automatically populated, which already, if you're familiar and you're a practitioner of this, you'll notice it will save you human capital in terms of creating this graph and creating this sort of lineage assets automatically in one place.
Cool.
Yes, the no-code, low-code approach here is great.
Fantastic.
Hey, I wanted to share my screen as well, if I may. For those of you who are watching this, either recording or live, aka.ms/the launch space is where you can find all of the links that we're going through today. But specifically, I wanted to show you this one, something that's relevant, something I just shared in the links. There's a tutorial, which is a great way to get started, scanning data with Azure Purview. And it actually provides some simple data. So you can go in and you create a data estate. There's a starter kit that you run. And then there's some data that you collect to run the scripts, verify permissions, boring stuff, and run the client-side scripts to get that going. And then you actually scan some data into the catalog and use manage identity to add to authenticate to the storage. And then there's some data sources you can actually scan as well and register and scope your scan. So it's a pretty good tutorial, and it's all part of the documentation that you have for Azure Purview as well. And both of those links are at aka.ms/launch if anyone needs those. I did want to cover that real quick, and I have a quick question for you as well. Are there, sample or custom sample or demo databases or data that we can use to sort of train our models here?
So it's super exciting. If you go to the starter kit, it has a sample set of data sets and sort of an environment you can set it up to play around with Azure Purview. So I suggest you try that out.
Okay, cool.